Welcome back again. This is Wi-Fi Tech Lab channel. Today let's talk about something called VTP or VLAN Trunking Protocol. Traditionally, the way of creating VLANs to the network infrastructure on layer 2 switches, we will go to access layer switches and manually create the VLANs to all of the switches in the network. We could maybe make an example with VLAN 10. We could just go to the switch global configuration mode and create a VLAN over there. However, in VTP we're gonna try to use this kind of protocol that uses or utilize the VTP advertisement or the trunk links to send those VTP advertisements over the trunk link so that the database will be updated on the switches on the other end. Okay, currently what do we have on screen? We have this simple topology or this simple lab that we will use to show and demonstrate how to configure VTP. Now let's take a look at these two layers that we have. We have access layer over here that have multiple access devices. This is the access switch, which is a layer 2 switch, and we have some client PCs that we're gonna connect to these access. And of course we have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 layer 2 switches on our network simple topology. Okay, now what do we have over here on our distribution layer? We have two layer 3 switches. These are multi-layer switches, which means they are capable of doing IP routing, even though we're not gonna be assigning or using any IP addresses on this specific lab. Let's just focus on creating VLANs and propagate them to other switches using these kind of modes that we're just gonna talk about right now. Okay, before we go to configuration again, let's just try to connect all of these switches or all of these devices together with the cable. Okay, I'm just gonna go over there and I'm gonna try to connect these access layer switches to all of these multi-layer switches, which means because of redundancy we will try to have one trunk link connected to one of these multi-layer switch on the distribution layer, and the other trunk link is connected to the second multi-layer switch on the distribution layer. Okay, I'm just gonna repeat the same thing over and over in all of these access layer switches, which are layer 2 switches. Okay, so let's do that quickly. And then on the last switch we not gonna connect this particular switch to, especially this layer 2 switch, we won't connect it directly to that distribution layer multi-layer switches. I'm just gonna try to connect it to this access layer. The reason why we just gonna do that is because we want to see some VTP messages being forwarded by this transparent switch. Okay, let's go back to these switches over here. These are access switches. I would like to connect these switches to one of these switches over here on access layer. Alright, so remember we said that traditionally when we were configuring VLANs we would go to the layer 2 switches and go to each and every switch on the network, and then we will simply create the VLANs on the global config mode over here by typing the command VLAN and specify the ID ranging from 0 up to 49, and then we will just create it from here. However, we're gonna utilize something called VLAN Trunking Protocol, which allows us to actually propagate those VTP advertisement to all of the switches enabled to be clients. Alright, before I confuse uh, some of those who have not seen or covered this topic, let's just go to these VTP modes and explain them. Okay, so we have actually 4 type of modes that we're gonna talk about for now, even though we're gonna configure 3 of them, which is server mode, client mode, and transparent mode. Okay, so what do we have on the server mode? What does that simple mean? It simply means that between our switches on the network, we would like to pick one switch that will act as a server. What the server can do, the server mode enables switch, it can be able to create, delete, and modify VLANs. Alright, so which means if we want to create a VLAN database, we can just go to that switch over there on the server. So which means that this switch will send VTP messages or VTP advertisements through these directly connected trunk links. Okay, so this is the trunk link, this is the trunk link, this is the trunk link. We expecting these links to carry or encapsulate the traffic that carries a VTP advertisement. Okay, so that particular switch, it can update its database on based on received advertisement, which means when there is another switch that acts as a server, regardless of this one being a server, it can also update its database based on the received advertisement. Because if we have another switch that have higher version number, that switch can actually become the server mode enabled switch. Okay, now what else it can do? It can forward receive VTP messages across the network, and then it can originate VTP advertisement. That is the server mode. That is the role of the server mode. But what most important is that it can create, delete, and modify VLANs, and then it can forward the received VTP messages, okay, to all of the switches in the network using the trunk link. Okay, now what about the client mode? Well, the client mode is the mode that cannot be able to create, delete, and modify any VLANs on the network on themselves. So you cannot delete anything when that switch is actually enabled to be what? To be a client mode enabled switch. Okay, in terms of VTP. So it can be able to forward or receive VTP messages. It can be able to update its VLAN database on a received advertisement. It can originate VTP advertisement. However, it cannot be able to create, delete, or modify the VLANs. Alright, that is the client mode. So client mode and server mode, they work hand to hand to each other, because the client mode receives VTP messages that are sent by the server mode. Okay, what about the transparent mode? Okay, if you pay attention, I haven't showed you this. If you pay attention on the access layer devices, we have actually these switches that will act as our clients. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we will configure these switches client modes, and then we will configure these 3 switches as our transparent mode, and that switch over there is going to be a client enabled switch, and also this switch over here, there will be a clients also. Alright, now let's check what is going on our transparent switch enabled. So what happened in a transparent mode is those switches, they can be able to create, delete, and modify VLANs on themselves. However, they cannot update any VLAN database based on received advertisement, VTP advertisement specifically. So they cannot update their VLAN databases based on received advertisement via the trunk links. However, they can still be able to forward the received VTP messages towards other switches that they are directly connected to. For instance, this switch over here. So this transparent switch, it will not have, let's say we create some sort of VLAN 10 or any VLAN ID number here, it cannot sit on this switch. However, this switch can be able to forward the VTP advertisement or VTP messages to that switch over there. So that switch can have whatever database that is here, whatever VLAN database that exists on this device, it can be propagated on this switch over there. Okay, it cannot be able to originate VTP advertisement. That is the transparent mode that we currently talk about. So it can only be able to create, delete, and modify VLANs. It can also forward received VTP messages to other devices that are directly connected using this trunk link. However, it cannot be able to originate VTP advertisement, and also it cannot be able to update its VLAN database on received advertisement. Okay, now let's talk about the last one, which is a primary server mode. Well, because in this server mode, it happens that when there is a switch that joins the network with a hard version number, it can actually change the whole thing. So it can change the way configuration was being configured on that server mode. So we have then something called primary server mode. We have that switch that can be the only one that is capable of creating, deleting, and modify VLANs and updates. It can forward receive advertisements. However, there is no other switch that can join and take the role. That switch can be the only one. Alright, this is actually supported on VTP version 3. Alright, now let's dive into the configuration of VTP or VLAN Trunking Protocol. First thing first, we're just gonna start from this switch, which is a multi-layer switch on our distribution layer, and then we just gonna go to the access layer. Alright, so let's go in here. So what do we have in here? We all know that in order for us to be able to do some configuration on any switch or on any device, we need to be on a global config mode. So I'm just gonna do that right now by typing the command enable first config terminal, and then I'm just gonna change the host name so that we will be able to identify which device we currently on is global config mode. Host name, I'm just gonna call this multi-layer underscore switch 1. Okay, or let me just call it multi-layer underscore 1. Okay, so we need to create our VLANs from here, and let's create a VLAN. Let's start from maybe 60, or let's start from 50. Let's call this VLAN 50, and then let's give it a name. The name that we would like to give that particular VLAN is, let's call it maybe by department. Let's say this is IT, and then we can create another VLAN and call it maybe HR, and we can create another VLAN, maybe VLAN 70 this time around, and maybe we can call it this is finance. Right, I forgot to put the name. Okay, now let's create another VLAN, and then let's call this VLAN 80. Let's maybe call it let's call it procurement, or let's just call it yeah, maybe let's call it procurement. Okay, now we have created our VLANs on that particular switch. If I can type the command to show VLAN, I will be able to see that we actually have some VLANs that are active that are created on that particular switch. However, we still have that active VLAN 1 where all of these interfaces by default they still belong to. So which means we haven't assigned any particular interface to any sort of VLAN. Right, so we just created the VLANs here, right, because we are not willing to assign the distribution layer interface to any VLAN that we create over there. That we can do it on an access layer switches. Alright, so we have these created VLANs. Okay, now we need to tell our switch that we are trying to make this switch to be a server mode enabled switch. How do we do that? We need to specify that this is a VLAN trunking protocol and the mode that we're using is the server mode. Okay, now we need to also specify the domain by typing the command VTP Domain, and then let's call it maybe Cisco. Right, now we've created the domain. Now let's also set up the password. Let's type in the command VTP password, and then let's call it 123 A B C, and then let's leave it like that, exclamation exclamation. Right, this is the password that we have created. We can also enable pruning in here, but let's leave it for now. So I'm just gonna ensure that all of these interfaces they are trunk enabled links, or they are trunk enabled interfaces, by typing the command, because you might be doing this on a switch that is the same as this one, which is a layer 2 switch. Even though I'm doing it on that switch, it is set to auto. So let's just do this. I'm just gonna select the range of all of those interfaces. If I can count them, it's 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. So we have up to 7 links directly connected to that switch. I'm just gonna specify them by their by the port IDs. So we have FA01 slash 0 slash 1 up to 7. Alright, so now that I've selected all of those interfaces, I need to specify that they are trunk links. You will see that I will be told that this is in auto actually, so we will be fine. Do show VLAN. We still have those VLANs, and then now let's see the mode that is created for that VDP. If we simply type the command to show our VDP status, this will show us the information about the VDP that we have created in here. As you can see, the version that we have, as you can see that we actually have that domain name that we have created. We didn't enable pruning mode, and then we can actually see that we have this mode that we're using, VDP operating mode, and the maximum supported VLANs. We can see the number of the value there over there, and the number of existing VLANs currently it's actually 9, and we can see the reversion number that we have currently. Right, okay, so what I wanted us to check is this, that this switch is currently on server mode. Okay, which means now it can be able to send or forward the VTP messages. Alright, now let's go to access devices, or the access layer switches over here. Alright, what is expected over here is simple. We are actually trying to, okay, maybe before we come to that, let me try to connect all of these devices here to make our lab complete. I'm trying to make all of these client computers to be connected to these access layer switches. These are layer 2 switches, by the way. These are layer 2 managed switches that we have currently here. Someone might be wondering why we only have the computers. Where are other devices? This lab is actually about VTP, so we didn't include much devices in here. Alright, this is just the basic lab configuration for this VTP. Okay, we have connected our end host devices as the access devices to that access layer switch. Right, to complete our lab. Now let's go back to this switch over here. We were just saying that we have configured that switch as the server enabled switch. So now what we willing to do, remember here, we are willing to not create any VLAN. We're not gonna create any VLAN here. We're not gonna be able to delete. We're not gonna be able to modify anything. Right, we're expecting to see the update of the database received advertisement based on the server mode on the other side, and also we're expecting to see this switch to be able to forward the VTP messages to those switches as well. Okay, now what do we do on this layer 2 switch? All we have to do here is to make sure that these interfaces, they are trunk links. So what I will do is, before I even forget the rest, I will go and select all of those interfaces by typing the command fa0/1 and then up to 2, because these are two interfaces that we want to configure them as trunk links. So I will type the command switch port mode trunk. Okay, as you can see, the line protocol tells us that the interface went down and then they simply came up. Okay, now that we are sure that do show interface trunk, now that we are sure that these interfaces, they're actually trunk links, all we have to do now, we have to specify that this particular switch is configured, or we would like to configure it as the client mode switch. So by typing the command VTP mode, if I show you this, I can show you that there are three modes that we will deal with. It's client mode, it's server mode, and transparent mode, which is why we would like to configure this switch as client mode, because the other switch is already in server mode to send the VTP advertisement down through the trunk link. So here we're just gonna say VTP mode client. Okay, now this switch is enabled with VTP client mode, but we need to specify also the domain, which is Cisco, and then we still need to specify the password. If we still remember the password that we said, it was 123 ABC double exclamation. Okay, now we can simply exit config terminal. Now let's pay attention and see what's gonna happen. We didn't create any VLANs here. We didn't at all. So we're expecting to see, as we type the command do show VLAN, we're expecting to see the VLANs that are actually created by the server mode existing here. Alright, what will shock you right now is that we didn't create the VLANs on this switch. However, they are automatically being propagated, and we can actually see them on our local database or VLAN database on that switch. Okay, now to prove that, I'm just gonna go back and add another VLAN on the server mode. As you can see, I'm clicking the server, a multi-layer switch, and I'm just gonna create another VLAN. This time around, I'm just gonna create this VLAN as VLAN 100, and then I'm just gonna name it bring your own device. Okay, so I've created this VLAN over there, but if I go back to that switch down there on the other side of the trunk link, if I run the same command again, I'll be able to see that there is a new updated version of VLAN. As you can see, we have now VLAN 100 on our network. It is being propagated automatically by the server. Okay, now let's go through these devices as well and see what's gonna happen if we don't actually we're gonna run the same configuration, but this time around we will enable these two interfaces, our trunk links, and then we're not gonna enable the server as the client mode. We're just gonna check before we actually enable this, the switch as the client mode. So let's select the interface and give it FA 0/1 up to 2 switch port mode trunk. Okay, now from here what we're gonna do is we're just gonna wait for it to refresh and finish up. Okay, let's just give it some time. Let's wait. Alright, what we're willing to check right now, we're willing to see to show a VLAN database. We're willing to see what other VLANs existing on this database. Do show VLANs. As you can see, we actually still have those VLANs, those defaults that we have, even though we actually enabled those interfaces as our trunk links. It's not enough. We still need to specify that this switch is the client by typing the command VTP mode client. Right, this is the second switch that we configure as client. Now what will happen if I go back and type that command again to show VLAN? As you can see, we still won't be able to see the updates or the updated database of the VLAN created on the server enabled switch. So we still doesn't see the update. Why is that? Because even though we have specified that this switch is actually a client enabled mode, VTP mode, we still have to specify that the domain is actually Cisco, and we still have to specify that the password is actually 123 ABC double exclamation. Thereafter that we have enabled that, we can now check again by typing the command to show VLAN. That's where we will start to notice that there are communication now. Now we can actually see whatever VTP advertisement is carried through the VLAN or the trunk link, sorry. Okay, now as you can see, we have that 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 automatically distributed or automatically propagated via the VTP advertisement on the trunk link. Right, now we can actually see on the client. Right, now if I come here and type the command to show VTP database or status, I can now see the version number is actually 2, and I can actually see that this is the VTP domain that we're using. We didn't enable pruning, whatnot, and then this is actually client mode. Right, and the maximum VLAN supported locally here is 255. Right, and we have added another VLAN, so we no longer have 9, we have now 10. Okay, now I'm just gonna skip this one because it is the same concept, so I'm not gonna do the configuration sort on this one and this one. Alright, I'm just gonna skip these two because it's the same thing that we've been checking. Now let's go to something called transparent mode. Alright, let's go to something called transparent mode and see what do we have over here. Now I would like to start with this one, or I would like to do the configuration on this one, and then I'll skip these two because it's just a common concept. So I'm just gonna go to this one. We are expecting to see something here. Let's go back. We are expecting to see that this actually can be able to create the VLAN on its own, even though we have a switch that have server mode enabled on the other side. We want to see if we can be able to create VLANs over here, because if I can just try to go back here and say VLAN 44, as you can see, VLAN configuration not allowed when the device is in a client mode. So I will need to put this device on a transparent mode before I can actually be able to create VLANs. Alright, because this is in a client mode, it cannot be able to create, update, it cannot be able to create, delete, and modify. Alright, any VLANs. Okay, so we cannot on a client mode. Switch. Okay, now let's go to the transparent. We're expecting to see the transparent mode being able to create, delete, and modify VLANs. It can be able to forward, receive VTP messages, but it cannot be able to update the VLAN database based on what is received via the trunk link from the other server enabled mode. Okay, it cannot be able to originate VTP advertisement. That is what we're willing to see over here. Now let's go to this switch, which is this switch. Okay, this is the switch that we're currently configuring now. Now we're willing to see, as we enable that switch, we're willing to see that we actually can be able to create some VLANs here. But first thing first, remember what we do is we select this to be our trunk links by typing the command fa0/1 up to 2, and then let's enable those interface to be trunk. Right, the interface status went down and then it came up, went down and then it came up. This is the first 01 status when it was going down, and this is when it was going up. Same thing applies to the second interface. This is when it was coming up. Alright, now what's left to be done here, we need to tell that this switch is actually transparent mode by typing the command VTP mode transparent. Okay, VTP transparent. Now what happened here is we still need to specify that VTP domain is actually Cisco. Okay, and then we still need to specify the password here, which is 123 ABC a double exclamation. Alright, now this switch is in the transparent mode. If I type the command do show VTP status, I'll be able to see that this switch is actually in a transparent mode, and the number of VLANs existing is actually 5. But if we can go to that switch over there and check the number of VLANs that we have, do show our VTP status. Okay, we can see we have 10, but specifically on this switch we only have 5, so it didn't update any VLAN database based on the received VTP advertisement on file trunk link. It didn't update nothing at all. So we just gonna see right now by typing the command do show VLAN. As you can see, we still have same number of VLANs. We have 1 2 3 4 5 with VLAN 1, VLAN ID 1. So we still have those 5 default VLANs on this particular switch that is enabled with the VTP transparent mode. Okay. Now what happened if I try to create VLANs on this switch locally? Yes, I can do that. Let's say I want to create VLAN 99 and I want to give it a name. This is a test, and then do show VLAN. As you can see, I have that VLAN, which is VLAN 99, and this is the test. I was able to create the VLAN on that particular transparent switch. Okay. However, on a client enabled switch, I cannot be able to create and delete VLANs. On the server, I can be able to create, delete, and modify VLANs. Alright. Now, let's see what happened on that particular switch. Remember what we said about the transparent. It can create, delete, and modify VLANs. However, it cannot be able to update its VLAN database based on received advertisement via the trunk link. It can be able to forward receive VTP messages, yes. However, it cannot be able to originate VTP advertisements. So if I come in here on that client switch, we are expecting to see that switch being able to receive some messages or VTP messages, and we are expecting to see this switch being updated based on the received advertisement. Okay, so let's come here and type in the command config terminal. Again, we need to ensure that this particular interface, this is the one. We don't need to specify a range in here because we're only dealing with one interface, so we can just put in that port ID, and from here we can just simply say this is the trunk link, switch port mode trunk. Okay, after that, what we can do, we can just wait a bit. After this interface is refreshing, it went down and it's coming up. It's getting prepared to receive some VTP messages forwarded by this transparent mode switch. Okay, let's just give it some time. Or maybe while we're giving it some time, let's create the VTP mode here. And remember, we're willing to make this as the client, and then also we're willing to specify something called a domain, VTP domain, and then we gonna say this is Cisco domain, and then also we need to specify the password, which is 123bc456. sorry, is double exclamation. Okay, we've done all that we were supposed to do on that particular switch for now. All we need to see afterwards, we need to check what VLANs are being updated on the VLAN database on that particular client enabled switch. So that's what we're gonna check now. Okay, let's go back to this switch again to ensure that we have not received any sort of database updates here. By typing the command to show VLAN, we still don't see those VLANs here. However, we're willing to see it here. Okay, check the difference. Now if I type in the command to show VLANs, as you can see, we were able to see that we have those VLANs that were created on the server mode over there. However, we didn't see the VLAN that was created locally on this transparent mode. Okay, the only updates that we received, or the only forwarded received VTP messages, is the one that is coming from the server, because we only listen to the server as the client. Alright, so this is how actually we configure something called VLAN Trunking Protocol. As you can see, we can now go through the server mode and update config terminal. So from here, if I can create another VLAN called 88, VLAN ID 88, and name it maybe let's say accepted AUDs. Okay, so let's say if we go back to that particular switch, we are expecting to see that new AUD switch, VLAN that we have created. So let's do something called do show VLAN. As you can see, we have VLAN 88 that is created. So if I go to the switch also, I will be able to see that do show VLAN, that newly created VLAN. As you can see, all of these switches now, they are being updated with whatever VLAN that we were created on the server. So do show VLAN. Okay, as you can see, we have that switch, or all of those access layer switches being propagated with a VTP advertisement sent by the server mode enabled VTP domain. So yeah, this is how we can actually create, delete and modify VLANs. Alright, so what happens if I come in here and say no VLAN 88? Okay, remember I'm on this client mode, that's why I cannot be able to delete anything here. As you can see, we are not allowed to delete from the client mode switches. So if I can come in here and say no VLAN 88 and do show VLAN, as you can see, I can no longer see it here, which means it's being deleted, it's being removed from the database. Now I'm expecting to see it also removed from this switch over there, because remember before it was here, now it's no longer here. By typing the command do show VLAN, I'm expecting to see that it is being deleted. Alright, however, if I can try from that piece, from that switch also to type the command no VLAN 100, I won't be allowed to do that operation because it is out of my capabilities for this switch. So I cannot do it, or I cannot perform this unless if this switch is on a transparent mode, and therefore it can be able to delete some VTP, sorry, not VTP, some VLANs that are created on the local database. Alright, now let's go and check one last more. What happened to those switches now over here? Switch, we're gonna check this switch over here. What happened with all of these switches now? It looks like a daisy chain. This layer 2 switch is connected to that layer 2 switch and that layer 2 switch, which is actually bad. It's bad to have this some sort of setup in the network, but because we are just demonstrating how this actually works, we're just gonna keep everything as they are for now. So what we're gonna do is we are willing to check that this interface is a trunk link, as we always do. So I'm just gonna type in the command config terminal, and I'm selecting that interface FA0/1 up to 2. Especially I need to specify the range over here because we have actually two interfaces that we can call them the trunk links. These are our trunk links, and remember, if we have VLANs, if we have actually two devices of the same type, especially switch to a switch that we're using a crossover cable. This is a crossover cable. As you can see, they have broken lines. Only in Cisco Packet Tracer you can be able to see these type of cables. So let's come in here and make this as our trunks links again. Switch port mode trunk. Okay, now this is a trunk. Okay, this is actually a trunk. I'm just gonna pause this and put the charger on this. Okay, so those interfaces, they are trunk links and they are refreshing currently. So we still have to do the same thing over here. We want to specify that these interfaces, they are quietly gonna have the role of being what, clients. So we just need to specify that. Okay, let me just come out of this. So VTP mode clients, VTP domain, Cisco, VTP password 123 ABC exclamation. Okay, now if I go to show VLAN, I'll be able to see all of those VLAN updates that are received from the trunk link, because this is a trunk. This trunk link carries some VTP advertisement, and then this switch updates its database based on what is received via the trunk link. Now we have same VLAN database that exists on our server. Okay, automatically, right? So I'm just gonna try and move on to this one, and then I will make this a transparent switch. One more, config terminal interface range FA0/1 up to 2. This is not case sensitive, so we still need to specify this as trunk, and then we need to exit from this interface configuration. We need to specify that this is transparent mode, and the VTP domain is actually Cisco, and the VTP, let's not put the password this time around, and I want us to see what's gonna happen if we don't put the password. So let's leave it as it is for now, and then let's go back and check do show VLAN. We are expecting to see no VLAN to be existing here for now, because this is a transparent mode, and the transparent mode can be able to create VLANs on its own. Okay, test. Okay, so it can be able to show VLANs that we created on its local database. However, now let's go to this switch over here. This is the last switch that's gonna enable it as the client switch. So we're just gonna come in here, and then let's see what we're gonna find, because we didn't provide that password or authentication for our VTP domain. So let's see what's gonna happen if we just not provide the password. Now interface range FA0/1 up to, no, actually there is only one interface, so we can leave this command FA0/1 switch port mode trunk. Okay, now let's exit from here, and just specify this is the client, and also let's specify only the domain, VTP domain Cisco, and let's not specify the password this time around. However, let's check what we have in here. As you can see, we don't see anything. Alright, we don't see nothing. We don't get updates based on the received VTP messages. Okay, basically we don't get nothing, no updates, nothing, unless if we have to provide VTP password, but still it won't have to work here. Reason why it won't work, because on a transparent enable switch we didn't provide any authentication, some sort of. So 123 ABC, even if I type it again, okay, it looks like we actually have, okay, it looks like we actually receive the databases, even though we didn't provide some sort of, yes, it makes sense. Reason why is that it's because this transparent mode doesn't actually originate VTP advertisements on its own, so it can forward received VTP messages. It can only forward, so which means as it comes from here, from this trunk link, it doesn't originate from the switch, so it just forward it as it is, and then as soon as this switch authenticates, then it will receive this information based on the VLAN database only server enabled mode. Okay, I hope this video was so informative to you. So let's meet again on an upcoming video. Okay.